Hello, all, and welcome back to a new episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we are going to be reviewing the film Maria. Sarah, do you want to kick us off with an IMDb summary for Maria?
Maria Callas, the world's greatest opera singer, lives the last days of her life in 1970s Paris as she confronts her identity and life.
Okay, and in Movies and Us tradition, we will start off with our one-sentence summaries for the film Maria. Sarah, what is yours?
Mine is, opera is life.
Yeah, nice. I love it. Are you an opera fan? Do you watch opera? Have you been to the opera? Did you enjoy it? What do you feel?
Yeah, I enjoy opera. I'm definitely much more of a musical theater person than an opera person, but I do enjoy opera. So I finished watching this movie like an hour ago and immediately started playing the Madame Butterfly from my, just, while I'm trying to get a few things done, just listening to some opera casually in the middle of the day, no big deal. So yeah, that's definitely in my wheelhouse. But yeah, musical theater trumps opera for me, but I appreciate there's so much skill that goes into it, and I love that. What about you? Are you an opera fan?
Well, I'm just imagining your housemates walking in as you're like clickety-clacking with just like the notes soaring, filling the room.
Yeah, no big deal. It's totally chill, guys.
Hello?
Just a normal day for me.
I love it. I'm a big fan of opera. Yeah, I really enjoy it. Been to a few, and they've been incredible. The first opera I ever watched was Tosca, and I feel like I just have a soft spot for that one. Mm-hmm. I grew up playing piano, and so my piano teacher would often talk about breath, and she would often use opera as a really great example of, the human voice being an instrument and the power of breath to be so expressive, and how that translates into how you approach and construct those in piano playing. So yeah, I'm a big fan. It was neat to revisit the world of opera in this movie again. All right, well, my one-sentence summary is the piano and the screenplay are not quite in the right spot.
Oh, I love it. You wanted to do a little rearranging there?
Yeah, I did. We'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, well, let's dive in with our high-level thoughts about Maria. This is, I think, a new-ish added release to Netflix, only a couple weeks by the time this episode's coming out, so we will not spoil the movie in this first section. Sarah, I'm really curious your thoughts about Maria. Did this work for you? Did this land for you?
Yeah, I've kind of mixed feelings about this film. I think there are a lot of really good pieces to it. Angelina Jolie gives a great performance in this. And it's just nice to see her acting, and just be reminded of how great of an actress she is. I like a lot of the creative choices that this makes, but not all of them. Some of them didn't really land super well for me. But I think with this, I ran into the same issue that I run into with a lot of biopics of like, why are we doing this?
Yes, I just even a back.
I don't understand biopics is kind of my problem. So I don't know if that's a me issue, but I was just like, can I just watch like a documentary about Maria Callas instead of doing this? Or can we have like a fictional version of this story, and the story could be inspired by her life, but then I wouldn't be comparing everything to her, it wouldn't set up this like impossible standard to try and live up to. So I don't know. I just, the nature of the film being a biopic, I struggled with, which is just a me issue. Maybe, I don't know. But I think there's a lot of good here. It just, because it's a biopic, I feel like there's like a ceiling to how impactful this could be. There's kind of like these weird limitations on a biopic, and I feel like it's good, but it's a biopic, so it's just kind of leaves you kind of in the middle there. But I think there's a lot of really good creative pieces to this, and I'm glad that Angelina Jolie is getting recognized for her performance in this, because she is great.
Yeah, She is great. I think her performance is probably the best part of this film. I am with you on the can we not do any more biopics train because we've done so many in the past decade. And I think that there's something that probably does feel exciting and does it for some people to see these iconic figures brought to life again, especially those that were so beloved when they were younger. And there's a nostalgia factor that feels kind of like getting to revisit past memories to see some of these big artists or musicians or political figures like, brought to life on the big screen. I can see how that's exciting. It doesn't do it for me. I kind of hate it, to be honest. And I think that this movie in particular doesn't work for me at all. I feel like this character and the life she's lived and some of the themes that are very much introduced in this film are very interesting. But I don't think the movie is interested in pushing it to its limits and really digging deep to try and understand who this woman was and then how those feelings or desires or struggles are universal. So I feel like this film plays a little bit too on the surface. It takes some of the trauma and struggles of this figure and her life and kind of like dramatize it. And I don't know, it just doesn't totally sit right with me. And I feel like as I've seen more and more films take these real life people who went through very real things and put it to the screen for entertainment purposes, it's sitting a little funky with me. And I think when the film is interested in diving deeply or trying to really understand who this person was or have an interpretation of it, I can get on board with that. But when it's just put to the screen to be put to the screen and they do some interesting like visual flair with it, I'm a little less interested in it because I'm like, this is someone's life and this is their legacy. And I feel like there's so much more that we could be doing with our storytelling than just this kind of thin portrayal of a famous figure. There's some things and choices that this movie makes around mixing audio of the singing segments that I also just doesn't sit right with me either. So on the whole, I think this is not a bad movie, which is good, but I don't think this is a good movie or a great movie, and it doesn't really like work well for me. And I think there's some things that are problematic. So I would say this movie is not problematic in some of the ways that this could have been, but on the whole, not a fan.
All right. Yeah. Let's do some rearranging of things. Let's move that piano around.
Oh, yes. Let us dive right in. So if you haven't watched Maria yet, it is available to stream on Netflix. And this is your spoiler alert. So we're about to dive right in. Okay. Where to begin? What are some things that really stood out to you? Choices that the film makes or scenes and segments that kind of stick with you?
Yeah, I really appreciate some of the visuals in this.
Yeah, I knew you would.
I know. It's there's a lot in here that I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, this is for me.
Gushing when certain shots are on screen. I was like, she's gonna love that.
I'm nothing if not consistent. But I appreciate some of those creative choices to really highlight kind of the tragedy of it all and the difficulty of it all. Like I feel like operas are always tragic, and I feel like a lot of the creative choices in this and the visual choices really highlight that operatic, dramatic flair. And I just appreciate the way that those things that you might see on a stage are translated here, and everything is kind of larger than life in her mind as she is nearing the end of her days. And so I thought visually for me, a lot of the things really worked. And I loved some of the shots. They're so fantastical, and the way that she'll be, wandering the streets of Paris, and then all of a sudden this entire choir of voices will show up, or she'll be transported into this really beautiful musical number. I really appreciated how those things came together and really helped immerse me in that moment with her. And just, I don't know, it to me was a picture of her mind and how she's processing through things. And then to cut back to reality where none of that is actually happening, I think just highlights the tragedy of it all and her kind of losing herself in this moment.
Yes, I agree. I think the cinematography is probably one of the strongest parts of this film, and almost this dreamlike, like you said, larger than life aspect of, for someone who was a performer their entire life, that blurred line between reality and the stage, I think was something that I was thinking about a lot throughout this film. So there's a conversation that she has early in the film where she's being interviewed by her hallucination of the Mandrax reporter. And she says, "There is no life away from the stage. The stage is in my mind." And I looking back on the film, I feel like that is such a great summation of how the inside of her mind as she goes from stage to reality, and kind of the absence of the stage being really a difficult transition for her. I can't relate, but I can start to empathize and imagine a little bit more what it might be like to experience the thrill of being on stage amongst these sets and large set pieces, and then having to cut to reality and it kind of being drab and boring. And so the life in her mind is so abundant and fantastical. And I thought that was that aspect was portrayed really well in this film, because we are constantly floating through these different consciousnesses within her mind, and her imagination getting to run wild as she's taking a walk through the streets of Paris in 1970. I thought that was captured so well, and the fast cuts sometimes, or the hard cuts, I should say, between something fantastical to when you're an outside observer looking at this woman staring at the steps, like there is nothing else there. It's just her. But in her mind, there's a whole big set piece there, and kind of getting to live inside her brain a little bit was really fun.
And I loved the line when she says to like the waiter, the cafe owner, "I'm not hungry. I come to restaurants to be adored." And it's just this, it's such a funny line, but it also is just a reminder of what her life used to be and people coming up to her and just adoring her, and now that is gone. And she's trying to like cling on to what used to be, but she will never get back again. So I loved those little glimpses into what could be, or and then it makes sense why she's kind of retreated into herself and is enjoying these hallucinations rather than living in a world where she is nobody and doesn't really have anything. So I think those visual pieces did a lot for me in this.
Agreed. And I especially loved how we would get to cut to, if she sees steps, for example, while she's out walking, it cuts to her on stage walking down the steps in the middle of an opera with the audience there, and then it cuts back to her reality in the present, and then it cuts back to the stage. And so it's so true when she says, like, the stage is never far away. And in her thought life, the stage really is never far away. So we get to see the way that those vignettes of moments on stage just come so quickly and easily when she sees something that reminds her of a set piece from a performance that she's done or whatnot. I thought that was really smart in the way that was edited together as well.
And those moments make sense too.
Yep.
Like, I feel like sometimes in movies that are really creative and do things like this, there's not always a clear connection to reality. And I appreciate the way that this film is constantly reminding us of what the reality actually is. So we can have these moments where we're like floating and it's grandiose and all of this, but then we always come back to reality. And I think that those grounding points or those anchor points are really important so that as we move through the film, so we're not just like floating up in the hallucination the whole time, but we can come back down and see what things actually look like.
Yeah. And those cuts to reality are not too long too. They're kind of brief, and then we're on to the next scene, and they always come towards the end. It's almost like this dreamy moment came to an end, but it doesn't stay for long before we're on to the next dreamy, fantastical moment. And I thought that was really interesting. If you look at like the percentage of time that we're spending in reality versus in her mind, so much of this film is spent proportionally in her mind, which is a reflection of the headspace that she's in as she's taking all of her substances and whatnot, of like she is not herself as well. And so when she talks about, hey, I'm like, I think I'm hallucinating a bunch of things, we're like, no, we've been there with you, girl. Like we have experienced it with you and been walking along in your shoes through that kind of terrifying constant switching back and forth between when those hallucinations break and then almost like wanting to escape back into them because they are far more comforting than reality is anyway.
Yeah, that Mandrax is putting in work.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
Okay, that's something that I loved in this film that I wish they could have leaned into a little bit more. The idea of Mandrax being personified in that way and almost being this like faithful companion to her, constantly wanting to know her thoughts. Also, towards the end of the film, we see the way that this like hallucinated person that is Mandrax, also is like able to give validation to her in the ways that she's longing for. And so kind of this common way that people describe their addiction to substances or addictions of any kind of being this like toxic love relationship, I thought is a really fascinating way that this film is exploring that through this like personified human form of the thing that she is dependent on, and the way that there is kind of this like feeling of camaraderie and companionship and affection that she draws from him as they take their walk through Paris, and he revisits her and comes back to her in the moments where she's feeling lost again. Like all of that I thought was so interesting and could have been maybe explored a little bit more. I was like decently satisfied with how they did it. I just thought that concept's really fun and could have been a whole movie of exploring this like twisted relationship with something that actually isn't a personified human but feels like it to you.
Yeah, I loved that too. And the part of it that I didn't love is that before the interviews we get the little like clapper board with the card of the next act. I was just like, really, we don't need that. Why do we do this? It's so annoying. We don't need the cards. We know what's going on. This does not help us.
Yeah.
But I loved the Mandrax interviews, and I thought that was just such a fun and creative way to get further into her mind. Like it's almost like a hallucination within a hallucination, because she's seeing him, and of course it's a TV interview because she is a famous person and we need to know more about her and her life. And then within the hallucination, then we go deeper into these beautiful, dramatic, operatic moments. And I thought that was such a great vehicle rather than us just like cannonballing into this larger than life operatic moment. We kind of take the stairs, and Mandrax is one of the ways that we get into the pool a little more gently rather than just all of a sudden being in a scene from an opera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's kind of like multi-layered planes of hallucination and that are happening, and some are hallucinations, some are memories, some are, I don't even know, like imaginations that are happening in the moment, and all of them are swirling around and existing at the same time, which I think is very reflective of the way that our minds work. There's often like so many streams that are intermixing together and cutting back and forth together constantly. It's chaotic up there, and it's probably even more chaotic when you're on something too. So I thought that the film never lets us out of that headspace either, which I appreciated. We're never taken out of her shoes for very long. There's maybe a brief moment where we see that she thinks there's a whole chorus of people, and we see that she's alone, and then it's quickly cut to the next scene. So we don't get time out of her mind for that long in this movie, and so we're really getting to walk in her shoes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's kind of a rough walk.
Yeah.
She's having a hard time in this movie for sure.
Yeah. I'm curious your thoughts on the way this film ends, because there's a lot of different places this film could have ended, and kind of structurally it's bookended with these two scenes that are parallels and mirrors to each other. I think obviously at the beginning of the film we know that she doesn't make it, but how we get there and what revelation she has on that journey to get there in that final week or several weeks over the course of this film is kind of the thesis of the movie. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't mind it. Like, okay, cool. We're ending where we began. I appreciated that moment where she is just singing in her apartment and there's a bunch of people gathered outside to listen to her.
Mm.
I thought that was really tender and powerful. And then that moment when Ferruccio and Bruna are walking away from the body and facing the camera, and both of them have like a hint of a smile on their faces. It's not an outright smile, but there's almost an understanding of, okay, she's at peace now, and she died doing what she loved, and she doesn't have to like suffer anymore. Like, that's how I read their faces. And so I did appreciate the inclusion of that shot and this idea of like, she was so tortured during this and really having a hard time. And then at the end, it almost feels like a release. And so I think that shot of the two of them really like reinforced that, at least for me.
Yeah. And it's a great answer to something that Maria says earlier in the film. My mother made me sing. Onassis forbade me to sing. Now I will sing. I am in control in the end. And that final shot of her singing out her apartment window and her kind of dying in that moment, but she has achieved a level of catharsis, of power, of agency that she felt like was denied from her previous seasons of life is the win for her. You know, like she has now been able to choose to do what she loves most, and she's no longer listening to or at the beckoning call of the forces that tried to control her in her previous seasons of life. And I thought that was a great answer to that conversation with the doctor that's teed up a little bit a couple scenes earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved that line of her really just like retaking control and taking agency. And, you know, she's constantly pushing back against Ferruccio, who's trying to make sure that she stays alive, you know, and that line that she says to the doctor really helps us understand why she is so adamant to doing things her way. Like, she's not just being eccentric, but she is trying to retake control that she hasn't had maybe ever, or maybe for a long time. And so that helps to, I think, unpack a little bit of why she's acting the way that she's acting, even though it's contrary to what we would see as her own best interests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's almost a will and a need that is being fulfilled that is not physical, but more deeper beyond that she is able to satisfy for what she needs now. I think it's all great. Like, I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna argue with that. Love seeing that told and the story of that told. I think by the time I got to the end though, I'm like, I'm not sure what this movie is about. In a lot of ways, it feels like a mood piece, a series of vignettes of this great musician. There's a lot in there and some great lines. You know, there's one of my favorite moments when Onassis and Maria are in the audience at the Marilyn Monroe scene where she's singing Happy Birthday, and he says no one cares about her voice, just as no one cares about your body. There's a lot of really great moments and comments and themes that are in this film, but on the whole, I'm like, what is this movie looking to do, say, explore, go deeper? And I feel like there's a lot that is good, but I'm looking for more meat on the bones, you know? And I was looking for more of that, but maybe the film's not interested in it. I don't know. I think about Spencer, which is another film similar in nature and thematically to this one by the same director. And there felt like a lot more to think about and ponder and consider with Diana and the depiction of Diana in her early life and some of the struggles that she was experiencing through that 1 week period of time, I think it was. And this one, I was looking for and thirsting for maybe a little bit more. I'm curious if you were feeling the same, or you felt like there's actually like more here that you've gotten to uncover that's been really interesting for you.
Yeah, no, Spencer is definitely the better film of the two. Like, there's no contest between them. Yeah, I think there's a lot of good components to Maria. I feel like this is one of those weird films where when you isolate components, they're all good. You know, like performances, good. Cinematography, good. Editing, good. Costume, set design, all of these things. I even think for me, I really enjoyed the script just because the dialogue is so witty and fun. And I think like Maria has such a fun personality in this. So she was just fun to watch. So when I look at the individual components, I'm like, they're all good. But when I think about the movie as a whole, I'm kind of like, yeah, it was all right.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. It's one of those frustrating movies where there are things that I think maybe could have been done better, but for me this movie just doesn't have that impact that I feel like it could have. And so maybe it just doesn't have that same depth that you were looking for, and so that's maybe why it doesn't resonate as much, and why I think this is like a good movie and not a great movie, which I think it has the bones and the potential to be great, but there's just it's just missing something that's preventing it from like going from good to great. I don't know. I don't think I'm going to remember this film, which is wild because it is so well made. But yeah, at the end, I was definitely left wanting more, but I don't know what that more would be.
Yeah, I felt similarly. It came up a little thin, and I'm trying to think like what would I have wanted to see. I also felt like the film was very long for me. I was really like chugging my way slowly one step at a time through this movie, and I would hover over and be like, oh my gosh, we still have a whole hour of this movie. And I think there's a whole middle section of this film that needed to go somewhere for me. You know, there's the concepts that are introduced at the very beginning of the film. Here's an incredibly talented musician, once in a lifetime, once in a century type of performer that has come along and is now on her final days and is really struggling with substances because of the life that she's lived and the transition from being on stage and an artist getting to do what she loves to not being able to do that anymore is hard. And like for most of the movie, nothing new is introduced other than just continuing to follow her as she's living out her days and continuing to reinforce that same concept that I think was introduced quite efficiently and quite clearly at the beginning of the movie. But there's not more there. There's maybe some, relationships that we get to explore with her kind of complicated relationship with Onassis. But I think that felt like there's something that drew her to him and caused her to stay for so long and have this deep love for him. By the end of the film, I don't really know what it is yet. And so I think there needed to have been maybe a double click into that. And there's something that he saw in her or he was able to give her that she's never experienced before. And the stage couldn't give her either. Like there's something there that needed a little bit more fleshing out. But I feel like for the most part, the same concepts from the beginning of the film are the same that we land with at the end of the film. And then we just kind of live her days with her every day. Beautiful, exciting, a visceral spectacle experience, but conceptually and thematically, I don't think anything new is introduced after the first 10-minute segment where we kind of get our main pillars of this movie and we ride that same wave till the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think I don't know, maybe this film I think maybe because it's a biopic, I'm gonna harp on biopics again. It just kind of struggles to know where to focus, maybe. Because Maria Callas lived a whole life and a lot happened in her life. And I think it's smart for this film not to try and look at the entirety of her life, but I almost wonder if it went a little too narrow in scope, as opposed to maybe diving into some of the other things that she dealt with. I think there's also ways that this film could have pointed out larger things in our society, especially about the way women are viewed. And she was like, when she was younger, comments about her weight, so then she lost a bunch of weight, and then there was comments about that and how that affected her career, and like all of this stuff that could have been really interesting. And then like, what is it like to be a renowned woman and be famous and beloved, and like, what do you do with that? How does that affect you? How does that affect your relationships? All of that. Like, I think that there's a lot more that this film could have done. It could have stayed in that 1 week period maybe, but maybe zoomed out a little bit into some of these larger things rather than it's very, very narrow scope. I don't know. It goes back to what you were asking earlier of like, what is the point of this? You know, like if you want to learn about Maria Callas, like, let's have a documentary and learn about her life and her struggles and her triumphs and all of these things. Because this doesn't really do that, but it also doesn't really use her life to explore anything more deeply either. So it's just kind of a well-made story that doesn't have much of an impact, I don't think.
Yeah. And she's so interesting that you could really just have a personified Mandrax interviewing her in that gorgeous bedroom and then give us like these series of vignettes and flashbacks and memories that are hazy and cut together really interesting, and let that be almost this like framing device for the narrative arc of these key moments in her life that as she's in her final days, she's thinking back to and reflecting on all of them and commenting all of them that with her new thoughts that she's having as she's thinking back to everything that's unfolded. But you could have Mandrax also be sometimes a little toxic and like probing in the wrong places or fueling these anxieties or fears, and then sometimes like giving her the come down and the validation that she needed to feel better about a moment that happened that might have like haunted her for a life. But like this kind of push and pull relationship between her and Mandrax being a framing device for her to process her life would be fascinating. And to your point earlier, the script is written so well that there's so many fun one-liners and witty back and forth banter between the two of them that I'm sure the writers could have really had a lot of fun with too.
Yeah. I think, man, it's always the script. It's always the screenplay. Man, if the screenplay is not just top-notch perfect, then the whole rest of the story is going to suffer, because this film has so much good in it. Even the dialogue is good, but it's just, I don't know, it's missing that extra bit, you know? It's like we're almost there, but we didn't quite get to the finish line.
No. Yeah. It's the beginning seeds that were there, but we need to push it somewhere. We need to take it somewhere. We kind of sat comfortably back at home base on the shore, and we need to go out and ride some waves and get, smacked around a little bit, and then you come back up again and you conquer and you surf all the way back to shore, and then we come back to shore. But instead, I think we're just chilling on the beach for most of this movie, and I'm like, where do we go? I want to go on an adventure. We need to do something here.
Nope. We are just going to hallucinate.
Yes, hallucinate on the
and
beach.
walk around Paris.
Sounds great to me, honestly.
Honestly,
But in our
time.
hallucinations, we needed to go somewhere. We could still be on the beach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, one of the things that I'm curious your thoughts on, because it rubbed me the wrong way a little bit, is, and I had to pause the film, 10 minutes in to Google, like, is Angelina Jolie singing in this movie? What is happening? What's going on? I have to know, because I can't watch this movie without that question answered, because I will be distracted the entire time trying to figure it out. And what I've learned is she did an incredible amount of intensive training and like really committed herself to learning how to sing in the operatic fashion, and really like dedicated a lot of hard work towards it. And she's really like celebrated for that, which is amazing. But what they did is they cut and mixed her voice in together with Maria's voice based on previous recordings. And it's constantly fluctuating. So sometimes you hear 40% of Angelina's voice, 60% of Maria's voice. Sometimes it's 1% Angelina, 99% Maria. And I thought that was such an interesting choice. I was like, it was fascinating to think about, like, man, like what is the approach here? If we're going to make a film about this incredibly famous and talented operatic singer, like, how do you handle something like this? Because you're kind of stuck between many rocks in a hard place, and all of the different paths feel problematic in some way. To do a full like auto-tuned like voiceover situation where you're playing Maria's sound tracks, but Angelina is kind of lip syncing over it, feels odd. But then also to have Angelina sing doesn't do it justice. So it's a hard task, but I don't know. It doesn't sit right with me. I'm curious your thoughts on some of the choices around the audio mixing. It's a solution that they tried to figure out with what feels like an impossible task.
Yeah, I think it's so hard, and I'm going to once again come back to, why is this a biopic? Like, if we want to tell a story like this, why not have it be a fictional story based on, you can pull things from her life, but it can be a work of fiction, and then you don't have to be dealing with these really difficult things. You know what I mean? So that is where my mind was the entire film. And I really hated that moment early on in the film where it's black and white and Angelina Jolie is facing the camera and she is singing. And I was like, why are we doing this?
Yep.
No, I don't want this.
Yep.
This is not it. So I don't know. I appreciate the creativity that they used in trying to do this. I think for me, and I don't know what I don't know what Maria Callas, if she has like an estate or whatever, so I think as long as that was honored, that the powers that be honored her legacy and went through the appropriate channels rather than doing something shady with recordings of her voice, then like, okay. But I think like it's just tricky. So I'm going to once again advocate for, let's stop doing biopics. Like, why do this messy business if we don't have to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I mean, they've backed themselves in a corner for sure.
Yeah.
Because no matter what they do, I think someone's going to feel upset about it. I'm upset. I'm in the camp of being upset with what they did with this version of like mixing the audio together. But I think I would have been upset no matter what they did, unless they did something a little bit more conservative, which is to play her track. Don't show Angelina's face. Maybe it's a silhouette or a back shot. You get to hear the voice, but you're not seeing Angelina's face literally singing those words as if she was singing the way that Maria was singing. Or you don't even include any of the singing until the final 5-10 minutes. And so you're like, everyone's talking about how she's this incredible singer, blah, blah, blah. And then you end the film with Maria singing from one of her performances, and that the impact of that getting to feel really big and emotional. could have been another way to do it. I think I would have felt a little bit happier about those approaches. But I like your stance, which is, why are we doing this in general? It's the ultimate trump card. I love it.
Yeah, do you like how I didn't answer your question?
Yeah.
But I like your solutions. I think you have proposed some good alternatives that also would be not problematic. But I don't understand why this movie was made, that's what I kept thinking the entire time, because, like, biopics, I mean, they're a whole thing. People love them, and I don't understand why.
I love them, Sarah.
I don't get it, though. Like, let's watch a documentary instead. I don't understand. It's fine.
I can see why. I just think that I would not want to be the creator, director, writer of any biopic, because, like,
no.
Especially for figures that are so beloved, someone's going to be upset. You're just setting yourself up for failure. Someone's going to be mad that something's not accurate, or something didn't capture the essence of Elvis or Elton John the way that it was meant to, or how they experienced that person. So it's tough.
And I think, especially with somebody who is beloved and influential, and particularly for those who have passed away, like, I feel like there needs to be even extra care taken to honor their legacy and honor their families, and not create something in a way that will do them harm. Obviously the terrible example is Green Book, that did everything wrong and was super shady. And there's just so much room to go wrong with biopics. And I think especially with a movie like Maria, or even like Spencer, where it's very creative, and there are these interesting liberties that are taken as you're taken inside of the mind of this woman who's going through a really rough time. Like, man, I would not want to open that can of worms.
Yeah.
But you know what, they did, and there's some good in this, and there's some problematic bits as well. So kind of a mixed bag with Maria, but I don't get why we keep opening ourselves up to this. Like,
I know. Well,
I don't know.
And I think it's also particularly the stakes feel higher to me when it's a biopic about someone who maybe is not as well known as well, which is something that I was feeling while watching this movie. Someone like Elvis, people have such a connection relationship. He's so widely known. And so there's a lot more details that people know about his life. But for a lot of people, they might not know anything about Maria Callas. And like, this is, because they're watching this film, the one dimension of her that they got to experience and know her for. And she's so much more than this. And I think if the film was more interested in diving more deeply into who this person was, not just her struggle, her trauma, her final days that were difficult, maybe I would feel better about it. But it feels a little exploitative to take like this person's final days of pain and difficulty and struggle, and that be the only thing that someone might ever know about this person, that might not spend more time to dive deeper into this operatic singer, So the stakes feel almost ironically higher for those that are less well known, because there aren't so many other sources of content and media that that person's consuming to know a more dimensional version of that human.
I think that was another question that I had while watching this film is, how did we arrive at wanting to tell this story in a biopic? Like, what is the crossover of people who are interested in opera and watch Netflix? Like,
What's the data? What's the marketing data?
Like, it's an interesting choice from a business perspective, I think, because obviously this movie took a lot of money to make. And are they going to get much of it back? Obviously Angelina Jolie is a big name, a big draw. So that's part of it. But how many people are going to seek out a Maria Callas biopic?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. So that was another thing that I was just wondering is like, why her? Obviously, she was great, a phenomenal opera singer, but how many people know that? How many people know that name?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
And well, it's also interesting to put in conversation with the other. I hate this. I hate the way that the media outlets talk about this, but Pablo Larraín has done other what they call complicated women films with Spencer, Jackie, and now Maria, and they're kind of viewing it as this like maybe intentional and unintentional trilogy. And so the other two make a lot more sense to me. I wonder if this is maybe the third one that was like a personal passion for this director, this team. I don't know, but it is a fascinating choice. I hate the concept of calling it a complicated woman movie.
No, that's gross.
I reject that.
Yeah.
You know, like
that's awful.
God.
The anger in my body right now.
I read that and I was like, I need to jot this down because I need to rant about it with Sarah later about like, why are we no.
Ugh.
Man.
Just that makes me so angry. I don't have words for how much that upsets me. Are you kidding me? This was a woman with agency who is making decisions about her life, who is well known throughout the world. Yeah, of course she was complicated because she was a human being. What the hell?
And honestly,
that makes me so upset.
Like, all women are complicated because all human beings are complicated. So
exactly.
This is not like women, a specific category of women that are extra complicated, that are worthy to be put to the big screen and make a whole movie about, which the movie's not even interested in like really knowing this woman deeply. So I'm like,
it's true.
Now you've got two strikes against you, my dude. I do think that I haven't watched Jackie, but I think Spencer does a much better job of teasing out these universal thought patterns, struggles, whatnot, that are like much more applicable and a little bit, I think, more meaty than this film. This feels a little bit like we're taking struggle and trauma and like putting some really fun flair on it and like calling it entertainment without really diving deeply. I think Spencer does a better job. Did you watch Jackie? The Natalie Portman?
No, I haven't seen that.
I haven't either.
Because it's a biopic, and I tend to not watch biopics unless we're reviewing them for this show. So
what? It's Oscar season, so you best believe we're gonna get a couple of these.
It's true. Oh,
yeah.
It's fine. But I do agree that Spencer is the better film. Anybody who is still listening to this review, number one, thank you for getting this far. But number two, just go watch Spencer. Yeah. It's so good.
Yeah. It was so fascinating.
It's so interesting. And the way that it plays with what's real and what's not, and seeing the way that she processes information is just so fascinating. And it's just filmed exquisitely. The cinematography is so good. The score, is so good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just go watch Spencer. It's better.
And what's great about that film, because I was really trying to figure out, like, why does that work and this one doesn't? One thing that was really notable, or that I remember very distinctly in Spencer, is that there was this overarching tension and stakes with knowing that there was this big decision that Diana needs to make by the end of the film, and kind of this wrestling of coming to terms with her future. And so that kind of hangs over the rest of the film and all of the conversations that she has with the other people that are in the home that are helping her process through and accept or choose for herself the life that she wants to have, that she's about to embark on, right? And so that overarching tension helps push the plot forward. It adds meaning to every scene because we're seeing her have to go through all of these emotions for being ready for this new life. And I think that Maria lacks that narrative tension, and it lacks that those narrative stakes that I think would help push this forward in an interesting way. Because I don't know what we're doing for most of the time other than just hanging out, which she's really interesting. So I'm glad to hang out. But when it's all over, you're like, so that was interesting. Got to hang out with a colorful person at the end of their life who is a legacy. All right.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, because Spencer, there's so many constraints in that film, and I think that helps make it effective, because it's interesting when there are constraints, there's stakes, there's a time limit, all of those things are very, very interesting, where I feel like Maria is much more loose and open, and we're just kind of in the haze of the hallucination, which is very well done. But there's nothing really pushing it forward. There's no stakes.
Yep.
It's just her going about her days.
Yeah.
And like, that's cool. Hangout movies can be effective. But a hangout movie then either needs to like point us to a larger theme or be so much fun that you just want to keep hanging out. And watching a woman slowly deteriorate is not fun. So this doesn't seem like a great candidate to be a hangout movie, in my opinion.
You're spitting straight truth right there.
I'm just saying is all, like, I don't enjoy watching a woman deteriorate. That's not a fun time for me.
Nope, it's not fun. Oh. The alternate version of this movie that I was thinking about, especially in that final shot that you'd mentioned earlier of the close-up of the butler and the cook, is if we were to have experienced this whole movie, but from their perspective. And we still get the whole legacy of this woman and her being so talented and great, and we get to learn so much about her, but it's through the lens of these two people that are so intimate and close in her orbit. I think that would have been another fascinating way to frame this movie too.
Yeah. I loved hanging out with those two.
Right?
They were so fun. That moment when the three of them are playing cards together, I was like, yes, can we just chill and play cards? Like, this is great.
Yep. They're so interesting. Like, they clearly, the two of them have a rapport together and care also. Like, there's kind of this funny, they kind of like joke about her and like are fake annoyed with her, but also have this deep love and care for her and adoration for her that I think would be so interesting to see played out and all mixed together too. I think that'd been really interesting. Another version of this movie.
Another version. We have quite a few alternate versions of this film.
Yep, we do indeed.
Yeah.
We do indeed. Okay, any other last big thoughts before we wrap up?
I mean, I guess, okay, so we have another pinky ring for my pinky ring theory. In this film, Maria wears a pinky ring.
Oh.
So I feel like that reinforces my more like limited definition of
male.
If a white male wears a pinky ring, he's a bad guy. But pretty much everybody else, it can be kind of loosey-goosey. So especially if you are an artist, like, then all the rules go out the window. But yeah, she definitely wears a pinky ring in this film.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
That's a good data point. You need the counter data points that are in the other bucket to reinforce the theory for the bucket and focus. So
exactly.
It's very good.
Yeah.
Good data points. All right. Well, this is our review and discussion of Maria. You can find it available to stream on Netflix. I wonder if we'll be talking about this film again as we head into Oscar season. I would imagine there might be some awards buzz, maybe for Best Actress. We'll see.
Yeah, we will see, because
this is Oscar bait.
We got our Oscars episodes coming up in a couple months.
We do indeed. All right, well, thank you for listening to today's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about Maria. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at MoviesAndUsPod, or email us at moviesandUspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss the film Juror Number 2. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again very soon.